Welcome to the Book Fair podcast. My name is Anthony, and this week we have an interview with Claribel A. Ortega. A graphic novel takes a creative twist on the Freaky Friday body swap trope. A library's new book curation policy is sent back to be rewritten for being too vague. A pro-censorship activist celebrates a win that ultimately amounts to nothing, and a library group's anti-censorship petition is being presented to their governor and state lawmakers. Now let's kick off this week's episode with an interview with Claribel A. Ortega, author of the Witchlings series. Good afternoon, Claribel. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thank you so much for being here. Can you start us off by introducing yourself to the audience and the book series that we'll be discussing today?
Sure. So my name is Claribel A. Ortega, and I'm here to talk about the Witchling series, which is about a group of misfit witches named Seven, Valley, and Thorn, who are sort of the unchosen ones who have to save the world anyway, and they have to try to save their home called the 12 Towns from a would-be tyrant witch.
What do you mean by the unchosen ones?
So at the very beginning of the Witchling series, the Witchlings are sorted as spares, which are the leftover witches that happens every year during the Black Moon ceremony. They don't belong to any of the covens, and they are sort of cast aside and marginalized. They don't have as much powerful magic. They can't get any of the cool jobs in town, and they are discriminated against.
What kind of discrimination do they face?
So financial discrimination for sure, social, they're ostracized. They have a different set of rules and rights than all the other witches in the 12 towns, and that sort of increases in intensity as the series progresses.
And what is the inspiration for this dynamic with the covens?
Sure. So my parents are from Dominican Republic. I'm a child of the diaspora, and I grew up kind of feeling like I was never American enough, like I was never Dominican enough, somewhere in the middle. And I wanted to write a story about what it feels like to feel left out, both socially and, just culturally, and write about it through the lens of a magical world and through a system of hierarchy in that magical world.
Socially and culturally left out, and the discrimination that comes about with that, and how that is completely a subversion of the typical chosen one trope. Can you talk a little bit about writing with the knowledge of these tropes and these well-established norms in the fantasy genre?
Yeah, I mean, I think in order for you to do any sort of subversion or to break the rules, you have to know them to begin with, right? So, writing about these characters and sort of how they had to overcome their perception in society and what their magic did because it was misunderstood is very similar to my experience as a person of color living in the United States of America. So it was very easy to sort of like pull from my personal experience, but also to pull from the years of me reading fantasy and sort of seeing what the chosen one trope looked like before and how I could put my own sort of spin on it. Not that, the unchosen one thing hasn't been done before, but I wanted to do it in my own way, sort of reflecting my own experiences in life.
And I read the first Witchlings book. I've covered it on this podcast back when we used to do reviews. And I want to say that that overtone of social and cultural ostracization definitely reads through. Can you talk a little bit about your approach with writing to a middle grade audience with this really somewhat heavy topic?
Yeah, and thank you for covering the book. I have listened to that episode, and you did a really, really good job. It was actually really impressive. And I appreciate that you sort of got everything that I was trying to do. And yeah, I absolutely love writing middle grade books in general. I like to say that writing them is like a comfort for me. It feels like a safe space. And I think nowadays, especially, kids are so tapped into what's happening in the world, and they have so many opinions about the things that are going on all around us, things that might surprise adults even in terms of, turmoil and injustices that are happening. So I wanted to write something that really reflected the world in a way that felt honest, but also to have that balance of sort of adventure and whimsy and humor that would make it accessible to kids and adults alike. Because even when I was writing the book, if I was feeling overwhelmed at any point, or like particularly upset, I knew it would be time to sort of introduce something a little bit more lighthearted to keep that balance. So it's just about, not watering it down, realizing that kids can handle these heavy themes, but of course, writing them in a way that is accessible and appropriate for them as well.
So I've talked at great length about how young audiences are more in tune with what's happening in reality. They're more aware than a lot of adults will give them credit for. But something that you said that is a topic I've never really touched on, where you said that writing in middle grade feels like a safe space. As someone who reads a lot of middle grade, I definitely agree with that. It's a safe space. It's a nice and cozy, comforting feeling. Can you talk a little bit about writing in that comforting space, about how you're talking to a younger audience and an older audience as well, in sort of a not really a rose tinted glasses kind of way, but you're giving a more optimistic twist to darker themes in things like Witchlings?
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why I love writing for this age group specifically is because they still have that optimism and they still believe that change is possible in the world in a way that sometimes adults don't anymore, because we get jaded and we get disappointed by the times that we have gotten our hopes up and we've been let down. But kids really still have that sort of like belief that things can get better. So writing for them and reinforcing that belief is really a joy for me. And it helps to keep me hopeful as well, to see sort of how optimistic they are about things. And they kind of have to be, right? Because they have their whole life in front of them. They have so much longer to live. And so it's a survival mechanism for them as well, to believe that something better is possible. And I think that it's my responsibility as an adult who writes for them to not only give them that hope and reinforce that things are possible, but also to introduce ideas to them that might help them achieve those goals in the future, like the power of, community. That's a very heavy theme throughout the Witchling series. It's sticking together, leaning on each other, working together as a team will always make us more powerful.
And wonderfully bringing it back to Witchlings. Thank you very much for that. Can you kind of help us establish and catch up for new readers what the Witchling series is about and where we are coming into this fourth book of the series?
Yes. So the Witchlings, as I said, they were sorted into the Spare Coven, and in the second book, there is a magical competition that I like to call Project Runway plus Magic for kids. And book three, there is a huge revelation about the world, which I won't spoil for you, but it is a very long book, and there are a lot of discoveries. A lot of truths about the world are uncovered, including who the big bad guy is finally. The fourth book of the series, Scepter of Memories, sees the Witchlings leaving the 12 towns for the very first time. They find this to find the famed Scepter of Memories in order to save their home. They travel west through the Enchanted Grim, a treacherous landscape where all of the most fearsome monsters in their world are from, into a brand new city named Jor, which is based on New York City. I was really happy to write that. This is my hometown. And they're faced with new challenges, new truths about themselves and their world. And they're also dealing with something called the changing times, which is this world's version of puberty. And book four is actually the quickest that's ever taken me to write a Witchlings book. It only took me 38 days, which is a record for me.
So, one thing that I did want to bring up is that on social media, you had revealed the cover of the Golden Frog Games, which was the second book in the series, and announced that the next book was going to be the final book in the series. I'm glad that that changed, but can you talk about what led to there being a fourth book after all?
Originally, it was supposed to be 7 books, right? And then as I mapped it out, as I planned it out, I realized that it was actually going to work better as 5 books. However, it is very difficult these days to sell a long running series. And often what happens is you sell the books bit by bit. So you never sort of know the future of of what the rest of the series is going to be like until the earlier books in the series sort of quote unquote prove themselves. For the fourth and fifth book, especially, I wasn't sure if it was going to happen because we didn't sell the books quite yet. By the time book two had come out, but thankfully the series has done well enough that we were able to get the 5 books that I was hoping for.
And that's definitely something that an author can't really dictate at the beginning. Wanting to have 7 books, eventually the story itself comes together as 5, but ultimately it's not your decision whether or not 5 gets released unless you go about the route of self-publishing. What has your journey been like in shopping the series around? Was there a lot of querying with agents and editors before it eventually got picked up? What was that like?
So I had an agent before I sold Witchlings. I got an agent for the very first book that I wrote, which was a young adult fantasy, actually. And then my debut, Ghost Squad, came out in 2020, which was not a great time to debut, but thankfully things worked out. And then for Witchlings, we did send it out wide. We did get many, many rejections. And thankfully, Scholastic really saw the vision and believed in the book. And now, Witchlings is on a lot of like wish lists for other editors and agents, because the series has done so well, and I'm really grateful that that we did have some editors that saw the potential in the series and that did offer on it, and that we ultimately landed with Scholastic, which was, I think, the best home for Witchlings for sure.
You can't really bring up Scholastic and a fantasy novel for children with 7 books without addressing the elephant in the room. Have
Right.
there been comparisons to other series in your experience with either shopping this around, pitching it, or even just touring it?
Not with shopping it around. Definitely kids ask me if it was inspired by Harry Potter or if that had anything to do with sort of the book itself. And that is definitely one of the series that I read growing up. But I will say that Witchlings is my take on a fantasy world in all ways. It is a queer normative world. It is, full of diversity and very happily so. And I think that it has become an alternative for a lot of people who no longer sell that series in their bookstores or don't wish to promote it. Witchlings has become sort of like an alternative series for many people who are wishing to have that sort of like middle grade, long running fantasy series without also buying into Harry Potter.
And that queer normative focus is prevalent in even the first book, which is probably the first time in a major publication that I had read a book where within the first couple of chapters we had a non-binary character addressed by they them pronouns in the prophet. Throughout the editing process, has there been any notes, any feedback? What have people said about these non-binary characters, and even something that I noticed in the first book, using the term witch as a gender neutral phrase? Do you have any insight on your end about what this has been like in writing and editing? Has there been any pushback, and have you heard other people singing the praises of these inclusions?
No pushback whatsoever from my team. If anything, they've been like, we should add more non-binary characters to the world, which has been wonderful. I have gotten pushback in the form of some parents, especially when the anthology "This Is Our Rainbow" came out around the same time as book two. Got a lot of really angry emails, uninvited from some school visits, challenges in school districts to try to ban the Witchling series. But thankfully, that none of that has like deeply affected me or the series at all. And the praise and the support far, far, far outweighs any of the pushback that I've gotten, which has been wonderful. I've gotten some amazing feedback from readers, from parents, from educators that Witchlings has really helped heal their students, their children, or themselves, their childhood selves. So it's been a blessing, and I feel really, really lucky that this story has meant so much to so many people. I actually got fan mail from a reader last night that brought me to tears, because they actually picked their new name after they transitioned from the Witchling series, and that was so meaningful to me, that someone would love my series that much that they chose their name from it. So yeah, for sure, I feel very lucky about that.
Another aspect of the Witchling series that I would love to hear from you is that a lot of times one of the things that fantasy authors will take a lot of time carefully crafting is things like spell names, drawing inspiration from Latin phrases, looking at the history of words and etymology. However, in Witchlings, everything seems to have a very clear lineation in the wording of spells directly to Spanish. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, so Spanish is my first language. And I remember many times growing up feeling like I wasn't as smart as the other kids in my class because it took me longer to sort of like, I had to translate everything in my brain. Even once learned English, there was always this moment of sort of like translation happening in my head. And that made, those early years especially a little bit more challenging. And I kind of impressed by younger me that I did so well in school having this barrier. But I wanted to make the spells in Spanish specifically because to me it made more sense, it was more accessible, more familiar, and I also wanted it to be sort of my gift to kids who spoke Spanish as a first language the way that I did, so that if they were reading this book in class or just reading it for fun, that they could feel like the smartest kid in the room for once instead of being made to feel like they weren't as smart, even though, speaking two languages makes you incredible as a kid. But I wanted them to have that feeling of being special, of understanding this thing without having to look it up, and have that gift from younger me to them so that they could relate to the story in a way I wish I had something that I could relate to at that age.
And with giving that gift of the Spanish language within the books to those children, and of course, as we've already covered, the queer normativeness of the world of Witchlings, have you seen a lot of support from the readers? Have you seen a lot of have you has Witchlings been received well by by the audience?
Absolutely. I mean, I have a small but very loyal fandom. They are reminiscent of the raccoons in the Witchlings book. They're always cheering me on. They're always there for me. There's so much fan art, so much fanfic happening. There are some ships that are so funny that I would have never in a million years thought to put together. But Witchlings readers are quite creative and funny themselves, and so I've received a tremendous amount of support. I'm always getting mail and emails and messages from parents, especially from educators. So it's been really nice.
And when your first YA novel and when Ghost Squad first debuted, did you ever think that you would be seeing this outpour of support from a loyal fan base?
Not at all. I mean, my first book deal, especially, was a very small one, a humble one, very quiet book deal. It came out during, the pandemic. I was just happy to be able to write books, right? I never thought that it would become a thing where I would got to do it full time. And the Witchling series at this point, even as far back as like this spring, or last year actually, has already sold over 500,000 copies, which is incredible. And I never really saw it taking off in this way, but I'm really happy that it has.
It hasn't just taken off, it's been given an international release. Can you talk a little bit about the translations that it's gotten?
Yeah, so Witchlings has come out in Spanish, Vietnamese. There's a German version that was just announced with these beautiful sprayed edges. They're gorgeous. And I believe it's also coming out in Ukraine at some point, which has been delayed for obvious reasons. But yeah, those are the places where it's been translated so far, and it's been really exciting to see the support for it internationally as well. It's doing incredibly well in Spain to the point where they released a paperback version of it, which I haven't had done for any of my other translations. But it released in hardcover and now it's coming out in paperback as well for book one. So that's really exciting.
Yes. The what I know as someone who is not fully on the inside of the publishing industry, getting a paperback release of a translation is a massive deal. And I think that the success of it in Spain is just a testament to just how well it resonates and just how well just how clear it is connected to the Spanish language. As someone who was a native Spanish speaker, how did you feel about that first translated draft that you got from the editors?
It was incredible. Just finding out that it sold to Spain was such a huge moment for me. I always wished to have my books translated into Spanish. So I was just very happy that a publisher found the books and felt that they were worthy of translation, and that of course they've reached such a wide audience. My only issue now is that they're a few books behind and they're not happy about it when they see me talking about the fourth book being out and the third one hasn't even come out in Spain. They're quite upset. But there's nothing I can do about it. It's their own release schedule, and especially now, if a paperback of book one just came out, it's going to be delayed even further, unfortunately. So yeah, so we'll see what happens. I'm actually in the process of finding out what's going on with book three. Hopefully, it comes out soon because I am getting tons of questions about it.
That's something that's so fascinating about publishing, especially with someone like Scholastic, where in the 90s when R.L. Stine was writing Goosebumps, his first year of Goosebumps was releasing 2 books a month. And then seeing that a series that goes on gets 1 book a year. I wanted to talk really quickly about the dedication quote at the beginning of the new book that says, "To immigrants around the world, for leaving a piece of your heart behind to make a better life, you are loved." Can you just speak on that quote a little bit?
Sure. So in book four, they leave their home and they go to Jor, where they come into contact with people who have been separated from their families, basically. They travel through the Grim, which is not something that any witch could just do because of Seven's very unique powers. They're able to travel through this sort of expanse that has, for all intents and purposes, separated Jor from the 12 towns. And there are sort of hints as to how they went back and forth in the beginning, which we'll talk about a little bit more in book five, so I don't want to spoil it. But they do come in contact with people who are immigrants whose family are from the 12 towns and were separated long ago and have lost part of their culture and have lost part of their sort of like upbringings. And I wanted to talk about that because it's an important aspect of why I was inspired to write Witchlings in the first place, with my parents being from Dominican Republic and me being a child of the diaspora and feeling that disconnect sometimes from my own culture. And I wanted to write about it in more depth and sort of see it from the perspective of these people who were taken away from their home or left their home for whatever reasons. And obviously, with the climate of how immigrants are being talked about and treated in the United States, I thought it was really important for me to talk about it openly, especially when the series itself was inspired by my own experience as being a child of immigrants.
It's definitely important because it's something that is often forgotten about, is that public schools are accessible to everybody regardless of immigration status. There are people who are here today undocumented whose children go to public schools. So it's important to know that when you're talking about immigrants, you are talking about people that you know, people in school, people with families. And so that empathy is definitely something that is very much needed.
Absolutely. I agree. I think that um, we villainize people who are just trying to make a better life for themselves and for their families and want the same things that we want.
And to round out the interview, Claribel, I want to give you this last question. I ask this to all authors. It's introspective, it's deep, and it comes out of nowhere. I'm sorry. There's never a good segue to it. Claribel, how do you see yourself and the work that you do as a writer?
Wow. You're right about that question. So for me, writing is and storytelling is about human connection. And the way I see myself is someone who tells the truth through their stories, that tells the truth of what's happening in our world through their stories. And most importantly, who gives a soft place to land and a place of understanding to children. It is the greatest honor of my career to write for children. I feel so lucky to be able to do this. And I want to give them a happy place to be, a respite from the world, a home when they don't feel at home in the world that we live in. And I see myself as a facilitator of a safe space for the people who need it most.
Thank you. That was an interview with Claribel A. Ortega. Her newest book, the fourth in the Witchlings series, Witchlings Scepter of Memories, is out now. You can learn more about Claribel and her work at claribelortega.com. Next, we'll be looking at some notable new releases for the week. But first, if you appreciate the work being done on the Book Faire podcast, there are a number of ways to show your support. First, you can like, comment, or follow the podcast wherever you are currently listening to help push the show out to new listeners. Second, you can follow the show on Blue Sky at BookFairPod, or go to patreon.com/thebookfair to find episodes posted early, as well as links to news sources used throughout the show. Following, after all, is free, and there are no posts locked behind a paywall. It's just a place to find more information about news stories that we cover here. Lastly, the best way to help the podcast grow is simply to share it with a friend, an educator, or a young reader in your life. Now, on with the show. Let's take a look at some notable releases out this week, starting with Flip, written and illustrated by Ngozi Ukazu. A black teen and her white crush swap bodies in this nuanced Freaky Friday riff by Ukazu. When she's not obsessing over K-pop boy band BGBB, Texas private school scholarship student Chi-Chi yearns to be noticed by her popular and unattainable classmate Flip. After being knocked unconscious in a rainy day fall, Chi-Chi wakes up the next morning to learn that she and Flip have somehow traded bodies. Though the first switch is short-lived, the two seniors keep inexplicably swapping places. And as they attempt to determine how to change back permanently, each subsequent flip lasts longer than the prior one. The duo's differing gender and racial experiences are playfully incorporated. Their hygiene boundary is keep tidy, don't explore. And Flip implores Chi-Chi not to imitate her mother's Nigerian accent while in his body. These scenes provide laugh-out-loud moments alongside incisive examinations of personal identity and perception. In her most autobiographical work to date, per an author's note, Ukazu draws from her own adolescent struggles to present an engrossing standalone graphic novel about self-acceptance, rendered using clean line art, dynamic paneling, and eye-catching color palettes. References to the Bluest Eye and a myriad of IRL K-pop groups add texture and personality. This book is recommended for ages 14 and up. Next is Defanged by H.E. Edgmon. On his 12th birthday, vampire Lux Pretty is scheduled to begin his defanging procedure via a program that turns young vampires into humans. Reluctant to give up the only identity he's ever known, he escapes the Vampirism Sucks clinic and seeks the safety of Nox Urbis, a secret city of rogue vampires somewhere under Brooklyn. There, he meets a motley assortment of outcasts and runaways, including mysterious tween Fennec and the group's jaded adult leader, Dog. While evaluating whether he wants to live as a vampire or a human, Lux settles into Nex Urbis, slowly learning more about his new friends and his own previously unknown familial ties to the community. But when trouble strikes, Lux and his allies must stand against those determined to eliminate vampires altogether. Via empathetic prose, author Edgmon injects optimism throughout the novel, even as it touches on heavy subject matter relating to identity erasure, forced conversion, and unethical experimentation. As Lux's biological and found families overlap, they offer a reassuring sense of acceptance and belonging in the face of adversity and oppression. Characters are intersectionally diverse, and this book is recommended for ages 8 to 12. Next up is Try Your Worst by Chatham Greenfield. Over the years, the rivalry between current high school seniors Sadie Katz and Cleo Chapman has evolved from academic competition into all out prank war that includes sending singing telegrams and instigating food fights. After an unknown third party frames both girls for vandalism, the school threatens them with suspension and other consequences that could threaten their collegiate goals should things escalate further. Now the pair must overcome years of antagonism and misunderstandings to discover who's implicating them. As they investigate, they open up to each other about their respective challenges. Sadie's struggles to manage depression and anxiety, Cleo's experience with chronic pain stemming from hypermobility, and their newfound friendship blooms into something deeper. But when the teen's enemy doubles down on their targeted smear campaign, the fallout jeopardizes Sadie and Cleo's fledgling relationship and respective futures. This emotionally rich, sapphic enemies to lovers tale by Greenfield touches on serious subject matter including mental health and invisible illness. Lighthearted prose, good-natured humor, and rousing character dynamics temper these weighty themes across the girls' uplifting emotional journeys and fulfilling romance. The protagonists read as white, Sadie is Jewish, and this book is recommended for ages 13 and up. Our next book is Scarlet Morning by N.D. Stevenson, author of Nimona. In his riveting series opening prose debut, Stevenson deploys lush lyrical writing to craft an original pirate adventure. After the pirate captain Scarlet Morning murdered Queen Hail Meridian, a storm dramatically altered the world, turning the ocean into a salt desert. Abandoned by their caretaker on the isolated outpost Caveat, 15-year-old Wilmer and 14-year-old Viola grow up reading stories about the pirates, who disappeared along with the sea. As they await their guardian's return, the teens protect a book of esoteric knowledge. When Cadence Chase, captain of an iron-hulled ship called the Calamari Rose, arrives, seeking the tome, Wilmer and Viola strike a deal. They will relinquish the volume if Chase ferries them to the fabled city of Faire Distance, where Queen Meridian once ruled. While Wilmer endears himself to the crew, Viola grows suspicious of Chase, whom she believes to be Scarlet Morning herself. Soon disaster strikes, separating Viola and Wilmer, and their efforts to reunite force them deeper into the mysteries of their mystical world. Dynamic black and white illustrations heighten the surrealist atmosphere of the vividly rendered fantasy setting. Characters are described with varying abilities, body types, and skin tones, and this book is recommended for ages 8 to 12. And finally, our last release to cover for the week, Truth Is by Hannah V. Sawyerr. When considering how her unplanned pregnancy with her ex-boyfriend will affect her future, 17-year-old Truth Bengura knows only that she longs for more options than the ones she's been given. While Truth doesn't know exactly what she plans to do post-graduation, she knows that she doesn't want to become a teen mom like her own mother, who decided to raise Truth rather than pursue law school. Disregarding her underestimating teachers and her mother's advice, Truth earns a spot on Philadelphia's citywide slam poetry team and secretly applies to college. Though Truth's decision to have an abortion leads to missed slam practices and strains her relationships, she finds solace in writing and performing poems that speak her personal truth, until her secrets become public knowledge in a viral video clip. As she reevaluates existing dynamics, new bonds with a love interest and her estranged father embolden Truth to have faith in her writing and herself. Sawyerr combines fast-paced, unwavering verse poems with text messages, social media transcripts, and more in this stunning portrait of a teen in transition that earns all the snaps. Truth's mother is Sierra Leonean. Writing prompts conclude, and this book is recommended for ages 14 and up. And finishing this week's episode with some news, starting with a Pennsylvania school library policy that will now have to be rewritten after criticism over vague and sweeping language. If you followed the Book Faire podcast or book bans in general, you know that vague language is the bread and butter of book bans. The issue with policies that restrict library materials due to profanity, vulgarity, references to sexual acts, etc., is that those general terms can be applied to many, many titles, including classic literary works. School administrators warned against this exact problem in West Shore School District. The policy was on the agenda for its first reading at the board's meeting, but was tabled by board president Kelly Brent at the meeting. The policy was written by the district's solicitor, but modeled off a similar policy passed by the Adams County Bermudian Springs School Board, which was drafted by the Independence Law Center, a Christian law firm that advocates for book bans as well as anti-LGBTQ+ policies in Pennsylvania. At the end of August, the board's policy committee agreed to add language restricting profanity, vulgarity, and sex acts. Critics of the policy have warned that the language is too broad and could lead to the removal of classic literary works like William Shakespeare. After discussion, the board settled on some changes to the policy. How some materials under this policy can be accessed for health, art, or language arts classes, as opposed to outright removing the materials. This policy also impacts teachers' classroom libraries, meaning that there will have to be manual reviews of materials sitting in personal collections within classrooms. Officials have also decided that this policy cannot prevent a student from bringing a book from home that goes against the policy. At least the pro-censorship advocates are consistent in their claims of being in favor of parental choice, where a child who has a book at home is permitted to bring those titles to school, even if the policies remove them from library shelves. Next, Pickens County Library Board considers moving books to section for older readers. This story comes from South Carolina, where the Pickens Library Board is considering moving books written for children and teens to the adult section of the public library. This comes at the request of South Carolina Senator Rex Rice, calling out 10 specific titles. This was initially done earlier this month, where the library moved the materials without following their own policies. Library district attorneys required the books to be moved back to shelves until proper protocol was put into place, which requires the library board to hold a manual review of the titles. The relocation of the materials was not on the docket for this board meeting, and so the decision was not able to be upheld. While the pushback from the district against the board feels like the right choice, it is worth mentioning that the library immediately complied with the board and the senator's request. Curiously, the 10 titles requested by Rex Rice were not publicly listed at the time of recording. However, at least 9 of the titles were confirmed to have not been read by the board members. The library board will be following up with the discussion in an open board meeting that is available to the public. However, it looks like there will be no real opposition to relocating the titles. The lack of information available on this topic doesn't bode well for the freedom to read. When library boards are not transparent about their actions, it leads to quiet removals like what initially happened in Pickens County. Next up, the group Concerned Parents of Illinois claims they have led to the removal of 2 books from the public library. Concerned Parents of Illinois is a pro-book banning group founded by Christina McCloy. Similar to Moms for Liberty and other groups throughout states like Florida, Christina is a conservative activist that claims her efforts have led to a new policy in Hinsdale District 181 that lets parents opt children out of school materials. McCloy wrote in a conservative online publication, quote, "By standing firm, we forced them to change, and today, parents in D181 finally have the right to shield their children from this age-inappropriate agenda." End quote. The first problem with this claim is that there is no age-inappropriate agenda, as if there are liberals that want to force children to read books above their grade level or things that are not appropriate or objectionable in some way. Second, and probably more notable in this story, the claim that the policy came as a direct response to McCloy's advocacy is simply wrong. After the statement from McCloy, the district sent out an email explaining that the opt-out policy has been on the books in the school district for years. In fact, the opt-out program in place does not even have an effect on what is taught in classrooms. McCloy also claims that 2 titles have been removed: My Princess Boy by Harold Kilo Davis and It Feels Good to Be Yourself, a book about gender identity by Theresa Thorne. The 2 titles are no longer listed on their online catalog. However, the district claims that the books were not removed from any libraries within their schools. It is wild that concerned parents of Illinois consider this a win for book bans, when in reality there has been no policy change or books pulled from library shelves at all. Next, citizens demand the resignation of Arizona Senator Corinne Warner from the school board after offensive remarks are caught on a hot mic. Senator Warner, a supporter of book bans that target LGBTQ+ and Black authors, is now facing backlash after a public school board meeting for Scottsdale Unified School District. Warner attended the board meeting remotely and was reportedly heard complaining during a presentation by the district's nutritional services director, particularly about the appearance of the director. The presentation was informing the board about the district's summer meals program that provided over 235,000 meals to children experiencing food insecurity for free. A conservative and a senator representing Arizona on behalf of the Party of Family Values, Warner felt that discussions of feeding hungry children was an appropriate time to make comments about the nutrition director's weight. Her mic was on, and the entire board and other members of the school district community heard her plainly insult the worker, with Warner's history of supporting book bans already making an unpopular board member even more contentious. And now, 1,500 community members have signed a petition for her resignation from the board. On September 9th, more than 50 members of the Scottsdale Unified School District joined a board meeting calling for Corinne Warner's resignation. Warner had not attended the school board meeting and privately insisted that she was misinterpreted. Some are calling for her to make an apology, acknowledging her comments, and move on, though the petition for her resignation will remain open. A recall campaign would be considered if the petition reaches 4,000 signatures. Closing out this episode with some positive news. A group's anti-censorship petition is set to be presented to Michigan Governor Whitmer and state lawmakers. The Michigan Library Association is rallying residents to protect the freedom to read in libraries around the state. After ongoing efforts to ban books in libraries and schools, the Library Association launched a petition in July that called on the state's legislatures to provide more funding to libraries and encourage local governments and library boards to resist censorship. The petition sits at 3,100 signatures and is ongoing. Citizens of Michigan can sign the petition at mirighttoread.com/sign before it is delivered to Governor Gretchen Whitmer and members of the state legislature next month. Public libraries have faced growing calls to remove books from shelves deemed to have unacceptable content, largely centered on LGBTQ+ topics and authors. In Michigan, these efforts have led to funding cuts as well as staff members of public libraries quitting under pressure. With the ongoing turmoil of book bans, growing pressure from radical groups like Moms for Liberty, and cuts to federal institutions like the IMLS, the Michigan Library Association is calling upon the governor and the state lawmakers to help fund and protect their local libraries. The fight for the freedom to read is an ongoing struggle. It may not sound like it, but book bans are overwhelmingly unpopular. And the trend across the United States is a result of extremists gaining power in local elections. To illustrate the fact, the MLA has commissioned a poll throughout Michigan that shows 79% of voters approve the work libraries are doing, and 75% trust librarians to decide what belongs in library collections. This follows a similar trend we've covered on the Book Faire podcast, where parental trust in school staff is overwhelmingly positive until the administrative level, according to a survey from the Every Library Institute. The study from 2023 showed that teachers and librarians within schools had similar approval ratings, with principals, assistant principals, and administrative staff having a near 50-50 split with approval, and support falling into unfavorable ranges with school boards. Michigan Right to Read is doing their part to help reclaim power from pro-censorship groups and state officials, giving the power to control libraries back to the professionals that should be in charge of them. It's always worth mentioning that many schools require library staff to have appropriate degrees, with head librarians needing a master's degree in library sciences as well as relevant classroom experience. Most places that have no degree requirements are, ironically, conservative states like Texas. They take away degree requirements, then complain about lack of competency in the curation process. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy of deregulating and defunding school libraries, then pointing blame at the schools for the failures of the education systems they refuse to support. Thankfully, groups like Michigan Right to Read, Texas Freedom to Read, Florida Freedom to Read, etc. across the country are all helping to protect access to information. And with that, this concludes another episode of the Book Faire podcast. To learn more about these stories, you can check out patreon.com/thebookfair. That's where citations to news stories can be found, as well as additional resources, like in this instance, the link to the Every Library Institute survey. Things like that can be found on the Patreon, as well as episodes posted early. You can follow for free. No posts are hidden behind a paywall. However, if you do want to support the Book Faire podcast, all I ask is that you share it with a friend, an educator, or a young reader in your life. Thank you so very much for listening, and as always, I'll talk at you next time.